You're watching Reuters TV. Here are your top stories.
A man carrying knives is arrested in central London.
A new round of warnings from North Korea's enemies.
United will now offer up to 10 grand instead of this.
This is Reuters Now.
British police say they've arrested a man suspected of carrying knives in the centre of London. I'm Reuters reporter Mia Womersley here in Whitehall, home to several government ministries, where forensic teams behind me are clearing the scene. What we know so far is that a man in his early 20s was detained as part of a stop and search operation that the police were carrying out. It's believed that he was carrying up to 3 knives. A Reuters photographer said that 3 of them were pictured on the scene. Armed police officers immediately cordoned off the area behind me. This is as close as we're able to get. And a Reuters photographer and reporter said he saw a dark-skinned man with a beard and a dark jacket being arrested by police with what appeared to be a bandage on his hand. The man is now being held in a South London police station under anti-terrorism laws. Now, we are standing, of course, just metres away from the Prime Minister's residence, number 10 Downing Street, but we have had reports confirming that Theresa May was not in the area when the incident took place. Behind me, you can see the men in their blue suits scouring the ground for objects that may prove of worth in any further investigation. They've spent quite some time picking things up from the floor, taking a note of them and placing them into their van, including what looked like a rucksack. Police say no one has been injured and they are carrying out an investigation currently. This incident, of course, resonating here, particularly because a month ago here in Westminster on the bridge, a British-born convert to Islam drove his car and ploughed into pedestrians, killing 4 people before stabbing a policeman to death at the gates of Parliament.
Drumbeats from the other side over North Korea on Thursday, the U.S. and South Korea vowing to squeeze Pyongyang even further if it crosses the line again with missiles or a nuclear test. But any talk of a preemptive strike seems to have been sidelined. According to Seoul, punishment would include a new UN resolution described as, quote, unbearable for the North. But that's as far as any details went. The threat's in line with a statement from the Trump White House a day earlier, saying non-military measures to rein in the North are still the priority, even as the USS Carl Vinson approaches Korean waters. Also on Thursday, an upbeat note from South Korea over the rollout of the U.S. anti-missile system known as THAAD. Seoul says it's moving ahead smoothly a day after angry protests and fierce objection from China, as parts of the system were driven to the site where it's being set up. The top U.S. Pacific Commander Harry Harris says THAAD will be ready for action in a matter of days in preparation for a potential missile strike from the north. Harris dismissed Chinese opposition, saying Beijing won't punish South Korea over a system meant to defend itself. Meanwhile, Pyongyang's foreign ministry says U.S. attempts to make North Korea give up its nuclear program are like, quote, sweeping the sea with a broom.
I inherited a mess.
Donald Trump's diplomacy is not a lesson in subtlety. 100 days in, the U.S. president's style is complicating ties with some world leaders, but pulling others closer, not least in Europe.
There goes that relationship.
Reuters special correspondent Noah Barkin has watched it from the continent.
European diplomats initially saw Trump as an impulsive leader who hadn't had a lot of experience with some of the big issues, whether it be Syria, Iran, the European Union. I think they're finding that Trump is moderating some of his views on Russia, on NATO, on trade.
Here's one example of how Trump can change. After some strong language on the campaign trail, a trade war with Germany seemed to loom. A first encounter in Washington with Chancellor Angela Merkel proving awkward. But just weeks later, though, a very public turnaround. Trump's daughter Ivanka invited by Merkel herself to Berlin just this week, and reports surfacing that Merkel and Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May coached the president on intricacies of the European Union, Russia, and other issues.
I said it was obsolete. It's no longer obsolete.
Trump's also rode back on early suggestions that he might not come to the aid of NATO members he felt weren't paying their fair share. But the flexing of military muscle, not least those missile strikes in Syria, also marked a shift from promises to focus on the domestic.
There's a bit of a worry that when the big crisis hits, that this rhetoric, the tweets, the confrontational statements can get in the way of a solution. So I think there's a concerted effort to sort of moderate Trump in terms of, what he says about these hot points.
At least one leader's welcomed the new style, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. He lauded that missile strike and sees a chance to reset ties that were strained under Barack Obama. Yet Trump is also learning that presidents have to pick their friends carefully. Erdogan is under fire in Europe over his crackdowns on opponents. And Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, that's a huge story unto itself. For the new U.S. president, diplomacy's proving a tough skill to master.
Explosions lighting the night sky outside Damascus Thursday morning, an airstrike hitting an arms supply hub operated by the Lebanese group Hezbollah near the city's airport. That's according to Syrian rebel and regional intelligence sources. It's thought that Israel was targeting weapons sent from Iran via commercial and military cargo planes, something Reuters' Luke Baker says Tel Aviv has come unusually close to admitting.
Rather than not commenting as it normally does, the intelligence minister, Israel Katz, went on radio to say that the airstrikes were compatible with Israel's policy in Syria. And what they've said in the past is that whenever there's any evidence that arms are being shipped to Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia, which is backed by Iran, Israel will carry out airstrikes to prevent those arms getting to the militant group.
Israel has largely kept out of the war in Syria, but President Bashar al-Assad is backed by Russia, Iran and regional Shiite militias. These include Hezbollah, a close ally of Tehran and enemy of Israel, which describes the group as the biggest threat it faces. Now Syrian military defectors familiar with the airport say it plays a major role as a conduit for arms from Tehran. The question is whether the strike heralds a wider conflict.
I would imagine that Israel is going to withdraw again. It doesn't want to be sucked deeper in any way into the Syria conflict. But as the conflict gets more uncertain, it's possible too that Israel will have to respond more regularly to those perceived threats.
Israel says Hezbollah has built up an arsenal of more than 100,000 rockets. The last conflict between the two left 1,300 people dead and uprooted more than 1 million Lebanese and thousands of Israelis.
A Russian Navy ship has sunk off Turkey's coast after colliding with a cargo vessel carrying livestock, according to Turkish authorities. The ship, called the Liman, served Russia's naval intelligence, seen here in Istanbul last October. All 78 members of its crew were evacuated after the crash, which a Turkish shipping agency says happened due to low visibility in a dense fog. The crew of the cargo vessel from Togo was also reported to be safe by its shipping company, with minor damage. The ships collided just north of the Bosphorus Strait, north of Istanbul. It's a heavily trafficked area connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea.
U.S. President Donald Trump saying he will stick with the North American Free Trade Agreement for now. The statement coming after administration officials told Reuters the White House had considered an executive order unilaterally withdrawing from NAFTA, a source saying the subject divided Trump's advisors. On Thursday, Trump offered this explanation.
The president of Mexico, who I have a very, very good relationship, called me. And also the Prime Minister of Canada, who I have a very good relationship, and I like both of these gentlemen very much, they called me. And they said, rather than terminating NAFTA, could you please renegotiate? And so I decided, rather than terminating NAFTA, which would be a pretty big, shock to the system, we will renegotiate.
The 23-year-old trade pact is blamed for moving U.S. factory jobs to Mexico and bringing low-cost Canadian raw materials into the U.S. It's also provided cheaper products for American consumers and opened new markets for American business. Trump repeatedly attacked the deal as a candidate and since taking office.
We've lost more than 1/4 of our manufacturing jobs since NAFTA was approved. And we're going to make some very big changes, or we are going to get rid of NAFTA for once and for all. It's a disaster. It's a trading disaster.
Trump had promised to renegotiate the free trade deal in his first 100 days in office. That deadline is Saturday. Canada has said it's happy to begin talks at any time. Mexico's foreign minister this week saying his country will end talks if the deal isn't fair for Mexico. It's unclear when negotiations on NAFTA might begin.
As Southeast Asian leaders gear up for their annual summit, one of the region's hottest topics will be getting less of a mention than usual. According to a draft statement seen by Reuters, references to Beijing's construction and militarisation of artificial islands will be dropped at the ASEAN summit this weekend, with leaders taking a much softer tone on the issue. This year's summit is being held in the Philippines at a time when President Rodrigo Duterte is on a charm offensive courting Chinese business. Beijing is also showing support for finalising a code of conduct for the viciously contested South China Sea. But as Reuters' Martin Petty reports, not everyone working on the terms is convinced.
There's scepticism. China has dragged its heels for many years. All of a sudden, there's now enthusiasm for completing this code with ASEAN. This works to China's advantage. It comes across as a responsible party engaging in multilateral diplomacy, while at the same time it's moving ahead full throttle with constructing its artificial islands and showing every indication of turning them into military bases.
ASEAN has long wanted to sign China up to the Code of Conduct, which would ensure freedom of navigation in waters that Beijing claims exclusively.
It's extremely unlikely that China would agree to a code of conduct that was legally binding and enforceable. China won't want to be tied to a set of rules, especially given the US strategic interests in the South China Sea. Status quo suits China. The negotiations for the code could be dragged out indefinitely, or we may end up with a set of rules so watered down that they become almost meaningless.
Skeptics close to the talk say China's enthusiasm for the code is little more than a stalling tactic that could allow Beijing to fully transform its controversial islands. In the words of one diplomat, what need is there for green grass when the horse is dead?
Giving up your seat on United just got a lot less painful. The airline saying Thursday it will offer passengers who forfeit seats on overbooked flights up to $10,000. That may sound like a lot, but the carrier figures it will cost them a lot less than a repeat of this incident. Shocking video of Dr. David Dow being forcibly dragged from his seat to make room for United crew members. Dow's lawyer said he incurred a concussion, broken nose, and lost 2 front teeth. The new policy also comes after rival Delta outlined plans of its own for cash compensation. United's offer topping Delta's by $50.
No, I'm not going.
Dow was yanked from a flight from Chicago to Louisville by authorities. United later saying it will no longer call law enforcement in such situations and that passengers who've already boarded will never be asked to deplane. United CEO Oscar Munoz, who's been under fire for the debacle, last week forfeited his role as company chairman, which was planned for 2018. Separately, a 3-foot giant rabbit named Simon died on a United flight from London to Chicago this week. He was said to be fit as a fiddle and one of the world's largest, according to his breeder, a former Playboy model. United said it is investigating the matter and is saddened by Simon's death.
Samsung shares climbing to new highs on Thursday. The South Korean tech giant posting its second biggest quarter ever. The net profits up nearly 50% from the same period a year before. As expected, memory chips were the main money spinner as demand grows for more firepower on devices like servers and smartphones. 2017 got off to a shaky start for Samsung, with its group chief JY Lee landing behind bars in a corruption scandal, hot on the heels of an exploding smartphone saga. But a memory chip supercycle coupled with the revival of Samsung's mobile business has put the company back on the road to recovery. Pre-orders from the new Galaxy S8 launched this month were higher than expected. Also on Thursday, Samsung rejected a call from the US activist hedge fund Elliott Management to adopt a new holding company structure that would effectively split it in two.
You're up to date. Check back later as stories develop.